Welcome to Humanizing Leadership. I'm your host, Louise A. Treed, and each week I sit down for 40 minutes and have a brilliant conversation with an expert guest where we discuss topics for next-gen leaders. On today's amazing episode, I am joined by the incredible Sowmya Rajasekaran, the creator of the Buildupwomen Series, an online community created to inspire, learn from, share, support, engage, and build up women during and post-COVID. The focus of today's fantastic conversation is allyship in leadership. Listen in, my friends, and enjoy the show. Sowmya, my friend, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Me too. I'm absolutely thrilled to be having this conversation with you for a variety of reasons. And as we embark on the conversation around allyship in leadership, it's a big part of the work I do, and I know a massive part of the work that you do. What I'd like to maybe start with is the thing that I read about you that made me reach out is something that you've called Build Women Up. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Build Women Up series and how it even came to be?
Sure. Well, Build Up Women started for two main reasons. One, it was a result of me being laid off right in the midst of March when the pandemic hit. And the other reason behind why the series started is really to kind of connect with other women, see how women are coping with the pandemic, how are they processing, how have they been affected. So when the pandemic hit, I began reaching out to women in my network and even outside of my network to do check-ins. And it was through those conversations that really inspired me to say, hey, there's a community here that is left out. And also, aside from the community itself, there's so many issues that are not really being spoken about. And I want to bring those issues to the forefront of these conversations, with the core focus on inclusion.
Wow. And what have you found then? You said, how women coping in the pandemic was a question that sparked your curiosity that you were inquiring about. And through that inquiry and curiosity, you mentioned that so many issues that are not being talked about or tabled. Mm-hmm. Are there a few themes or top topics that really struck you in these conversations that you're having with these different women?
Absolutely. There were several. The one thing was a sense of loneliness when you're not actually alone, because many women, including myself, really had to process layoffs, but also navigate the new form of life early on in the pandemic and trying to figure out how you're going to provide for your family or what's next for you as an individual while keeping it all together. So the several kind of main themes that really came to light was about surrounding mental health and coping with job loss and creating opportunities for yourself, looking at anti-racism and inclusion, looking at economic abuse in Canada, even kind of focusing on motherhood and navigating everything else. And the one really amazing thing as well was looking at education during the pandemic and having it from the perspective of the students, and not from parents and school boards. So there are so many incredible conversations that kind of helped me in this line to say, what a lot of people are saying these things. Why don't we address this candidly and unfiltered, and bring diverse perspectives to this forefront of the conversation? I think part of what I also wanted to do with the series is provide opportunities for individuals to carve out time for themselves to engage in these conversations. Mm-hmm. And also, as a result of these conversations, provide resources so people can action out some items within themselves and the work that they're doing, and also even spread the word and bring those resources to to their colleagues or friends or family members, or even in the organizations that they're working for.
That's wonderful. There's so many things that you've said that I find inspiring and so interesting. We can dive down into so many different areas. One of the things that struck me is how you're seeking to connect and inspire women and also give really tangible tools. I love there's so much power in those three things, in connection, in feeling and being inspired, and then being able to walk away with something actionable. So a couple of questions here. How is this available to people? So this series, how is it a podcast? Is it video? Is it live? How would people get involved and get access to this series?
Yeah, so it's a virtual live event. It is free. Every month there is an event that's happening with a core theme. So this month the theme is to celebrate and honor Black women in leadership as to kind of focus on Black History Month. But we wanted to build a women series. We wanted to really kind of focus on Black women in leadership and talk about key themes such as the barriers to leadership, look at access to funds and resources when it comes to Black owned and run businesses. So it's going to be an amazing lineup. So individuals should be able to see the events on Eventbrite. They can also go to Build Up Women Series Twitter, which is at Build Up Women, capital S, on our LinkedIn group, which is Build Up Women Series, as well as our Facebook group at Build Up Women Series as well.
Before I comment on the amazingness of what it is that you're doing, I want to just share with my listeners that if you're driving, if you're doing something else, all of these links to be able to access the Build Up Women series will be in the show notes. So do not worry about that. And remind or share with me, I did see it online. Please share the date of this particular virtual live event that's celebrating and having the conversation with Black women in leadership.
Sure. So the date of the event is on Friday, February the 26th, and it is at 1:00 Eastern Standard Time.
Awesome. So I'm going to be there. I cannot wait to
Yes.
to hear the conversation and learn and be inspired. You also mentioned that there are resources available that can benefit the individual, as well as be tools or resources that can go into the workplace, help colleagues, and potentially even help their own individuals' own leaders. What kinds of resources are you referring to?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll kind of shift back a little bit. Part of the way that it's designed this way is so there's that level of accountability for oneself, but also in the work that we're doing is, okay, so you've come here and you listen to what people have to say, but what are you doing about it? So the resources and networks really depend on the theme of the live event. So they are different. So a lot of these resources are cultivated from the speakers, are being brought on from the speakers. So the most recent one that we did was on the power of allyship, where we had an amazing speaker. Her name was Camille Dundaz, who is an incredible Black woman who's actually running her own training for the workplace when it comes to allyship and providing allyship training. So for leaders who are really kind of trying to navigate this allyship pathway, not really sure what it entails, where to begin, could actually be a first step in their learning.
Wonderful. So you've mentioned allyship a few times now, and allyship in leadership is the focus of the show. And what a great mechanism that leaders now have access to through what it is that you do to be better allies. Perhaps you could share with me what you have learned through these conversations that you've been having with women, these virtual live events. Have you noticed again any themes, or do you have any thoughts on what leaders can do to be better allies?
Yeah, so I'll take this back to when I first started. Entrepreneurship wasn't a realm that I ever explored or entertained before. It's something that happened to me as a result of layoff and connecting with incredible women. And it was through that journey where I said, I want to build a new community where we can network and learn from and engage and not feel lonely and just build one another up and instill self-confidence in the work that we're doing. And it was through that journey where I was trying to pitch my concept essentially to incredible women who I was very in awe by in the work that they're doing. I'd never met with them face to face before, so I didn't know how those conversations were going to go. So it was in those concept pitches that when I chatted with them, and they were really kind of all in my why I was doing for the series, completely coming into support in any way that they can. I think that is a true example of allyship, is supporting women and supporting in general people that you don't know, and really believing in their why because there's a need for something like this. And for me, it's not just kind of focusing on the support that I have received, but it's also putting it back into the community. So finding ways that I can support other young leaders, young women, other women who are really trying to pursue something, that I can help mentor or help them connect with individuals that are part of my tribe, I'd like to say now, and build each other up when you have levels of self-doubt, really as a way of kind of lending a hand or lending a ear, and as a way of just being there.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this concept or term of ally, the concept I don't think is new, but certainly the term allyship is relatively new in mainstream. And I think is a huge responsibility of leaders today. I think should have been a responsibility before. Not sure how well that was necessarily embodied. But I think it's an element of next gen leaders. It's mandatory. It's necessary. What other qualities do you think successful leaders in the future will also need to embody?
Yeah, I think the main one is that there's so much focus on diversity, and then inclusion is always the second focus. Inclusion needs to come first. There needs to be a true understanding of what it means to be diverse and what it means to be inclusive. So just because you're at the table doesn't necessarily mean that you have an opportunity to speak up. So it's really being cognizant of the way that these conversations are happening. Even, for example, looking at this month, having it be Black History Month, how many leaders are actually having conversations around that? How many leaders are actually honoring and celebrating incredible people and the work that they have done and are doing? It's really recognizing the barriers and the gaps and figuring out how you can change it. And it has to come from top to bottom. It has to come from leaders. It's everyone's responsibility. And so, and you need to start having those conversations. And just because you say that you're inclusive, are you actually inclusive by action? That's a kind of a true testament to the work that you're doing.
Inclusive by action. I love that. It's a great phrase. What's from your experience and standpoint, what's stopping leaders from having these conversations?
I think it's one of the main ones, and this even came up from our recent event and the power of allyship, is just not knowing whether you're asking the right questions or just not knowing, really, or fear of offending, fear of excluding individuals part of these conversations. So I think it's just not really knowing how to approach this. But I feel like the other side of the coin is that there is no level of accountability, right? So you can say, whether that's part of your mandate or your vision on a website, you're saying we are really focusing on diversity, inclusion, and equity. But how? Like, how are you doing this by action, right? Is this publicly known? Like, how are you being held accountable for these really, really strong words, right? That you've put within as part of your vision and your mandate. I think that's kind of part of the other issue, is that there's no accountability, or there's limited accountability and it's the same way of saying that you're allies. So an example that was, even rose from, my other conversations were, when we're doing, land acknowledgements, right?
Right.
So it's great that your organization is doing land acknowledgement, but what else are you doing? Right. So those are just kind of key examples of, yes, you're speaking the words, but what is the action item? Like, how is your organization, or how are you as an individual or as a leader? How are you creating change? Where is the accountability coming from?
I love that too. How are you as a leader creating change? And you've mentioned it a couple of times, like personal accountability. So I think that needs to be accountability at a personal level as well as at an organizational level. And leadership is also how that personal accountability piece is so important, because even if you are not a quote unquote leader, in that you've got responsibility for the performance reviews and salaries of other individuals, we all have the opportunity to show up as a leader in our workplace, in our lives.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think part of that is also being okay with not being put in an uncomfortable situation. That's also allyship, because that happens many times, and it's being comfortable with the stance that you're taking and not doing it because it makes you look good, but doing it because it needs to be done. So I think that's like another big challenge with organizations, kind of taking on, many changes when it comes to anti-racism and inclusion, or when it comes to inclusive hiring, or when it comes to having a core focus on diversity and inclusion, equity. It's being okay with the way that you're actioning things out, and not doing it because, you're going to be on the front page of news and you're making your organization look good. You're doing it because you're wanting to do better in the way that you guys are doing things. So
it's so important what you're saying. And it seems kind of obvious until you work in an organization that does it for all the wrong reasons. And there's so much power with what you just shared there. So it was years ago now that I worked for an organization that they did it. The D&I, not just D&I, but a lot of the work that they did, while really good on paper, the plans and the programs were fantastic. It was for the purpose of winning awards. And they got lots of awards, different kind of workplace recognition awards. And it was such a stark difference from what the experience was like actually in the workplace.
Yeah.
So I just had to share that just to really highlight the importance of it. Sounds like obvious. It sounds obvious that what you just said, but it isn't so commonly done. Intention is not enough. Intention is not enough.
Yeah, and that's, I've certainly been with organizations when it comes to projects and other programs that we run where the focus was on diversity and inclusion, but internally that wasn't a focus. And so that was just very bizarre to me, is why are we taking something on that we're not practicing ourselves, So I think that's another kind of accountability basis. Having kind of open conversations about this and being okay with being okay and accepting that, okay, yes, we have gaps within our own organization, but what are we going to do to tackle this together? And what does that mean? Like, what is our goal, right? So I think it's just having very raw, unfiltered conversations, not having conversations to look good, but having these conversations because they need to be had.
Yes to that. Like, yes to that. So there's so much discomfort for so many around these kinds of conversations. How do we help our leaders who need to be engaging in these conversations with their teams? How can we help bridge the space where they are to the space that they need to be in terms of they themselves having these open dialogues with their own teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive change in the way they're approaching things, right? And I think one of the key examples I can give you is the way that human resources even run. A lot of people say that human resources is there as a benefit to the organization, not the people, right? So you'll see a lot of changes, even when it comes to the way human resources are being run in organizations, that the focus is on people and culture. And the human resources is not even part of the role anymore. It's more focused on the people and the workplace culture. So, but then again, just because it says that, we need to make sure that it's actually true, right? So when it comes to leaders, I think it's a lot of work for individuals to really look deep within themselves, and really look at, well, are we resonating? Are we putting out there what we mean to put out in the way that we are describing our mission and our vision? And those are hard conversations to be had, and it's not a very easy one. And that even goes back to the board. Like if you're an organization that has a board, who's sitting at the table? How inclusive is this board? That's another thing to look at is, who's at the table? How inclusive are these conversations? What is it, and how involved are leaders, with their employees when it comes to having these conversations? Because there is a lot of segregation depending on the organization they're working for, where executive teams, kind of stay within their own kind of bubble. And then there are other employees who stay within their own bubble. And there's that level of segregation, and there isn't enough unity, in the way that, whether that's in the way that we're working or in the way that we're communicating, in the way that we're analyzing workplace culture. So all of that really needs to be brought to the table with everyone, not just executive team, not just head of HR, for example. It needs to be everyone, and people need to feel comfortable and welcomed to receive feedback that is not comfortable.
Yeah.
I think that's also the fear factor is, oh my goodness, what if I say this and I'm going to be fired or I'm going to be reprimanded for the way that I'm saying these? I think it comes back to, how are you leading your organization? Are you leading them in fear or intimidation? Or is it a welcoming organization, where you are actually open to having these conversations and saying, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I didn't know that we were doing it this way. What can we do together to kind of move this forward and change the way that we're approaching this? So I think and obviously you can't come from all leaders. There's some that are just, dead set in their ways, in which case that might not be the organization that you need to be in. So just leave, right? But it's absolutely true, because I've certainly been in those situations where I feel like, you know what, I'm doing everything that I can, but unless, the executive team is doing something, I can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
And it's that feeling of helplessness that drives you, to really leave and say, I'm going to go somewhere where these conversations are welcomed, first of all, and I'm actually sitting at a table and I'm being, and I feel comfortable to speak up and say, no, this isn't right. This isn't how we should be doing things. And it seems so small, but it's so big, especially for me, coming as a woman of color. I'm not represented, even on the executive level or, at a table, right? So I think those are kind of critical things to look at, not only on the leadership level, but also as an individual kind of going in, working for organizations, is really understanding, is this the organization that I want to be working for?
Yeah, such a great question. So much great commentary there as well. Who's at the table? At every table, right? Yeah. And I think you raised that when you were talking about the executive table, and then you talked about the board, your own team. So table can be used, I think, in every part of your workplace reality. What I think is also extremely important, I'm sure you'd echo this, or I imagine you would echo this, is even in your friend circles, who's at your table?
Mm-hmm.
Your friend circles, your business circles or networking circles, who's at those tables?
Yeah.
That's the personal accountability piece that I think is so important for us to be reflecting on when we're talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging.
Yeah, absolutely.
You also talked about comfort. And is that not the ultimate privilege?
It is.
Right? and I know privilege is a topic that we talk about a lot in this space, but I continue to be shocked at how people outside of the space have no idea what we're talking about. Talk to me a little bit in case, and if you are listening and you don't know what I'm referring to, welcome. And thank you for being part of this show and being dedicated to listening and learning. Tell me a little bit about privilege and what's your experience been as a woman of color, from, seeing privilege exercised in others, and how does that link to allyship? So much in all of what I just asked.
Yeah. So woman of color, and then woman of color who's a mom.
Yeah.
So it just builds on, right? So from my experience, I definitely didn't feel represented. I didn't feel I could easily speak to individuals who were in the HR level about my concerns, for many reasons, because the executive level was pretty male dominated. And I didn't feel as though I was being heard. So that part was very, very difficult to try to navigate it. And it builds on kind of your headspace and your mentality is why has nothing changed? I've done everything that I can as one person. But what's been really incredible as well is connecting with other women who felt the same way and being there for one another through allyship, and saying, you know what, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to support. This is how we're going to go in together and to kind of take a stance on these things. This is how, and then it also, I feel like once I became a mom, I felt like I had this very, I'm not sure how to explain this, but this kind of, I don't really care what you have to say type of mentality. Because it's absolutely true when you're a mom and you're going back to work or you're going back into running your business, there is this narrative that you can't handle it all. Yeah. There is this mindset of, oh, this is too much for you. Or there's this mindset of, we're going to give someone else this opportunity because we're not sure if you're ready. Right. So it's all these things that just kind of pile on and you say enough is enough. And I'm going to go and I'm going to talk to someone about this, saying that this isn't right. This is unfair. This is, not inclusive whatsoever. This is very much you're choosing to, do these things just because I became a mom. Right. Making it seem as though I am less powerful and because I'm a mom. So, I mean, it really, there's a way to kind of go about it in the sense that you're either going to do something about it or you feel so beat down that you don't have, support, or mentorship behind you to say, you know what, like you can do this, you can speak up on your own. But the fear factor is, what is kind of the result of me speaking up? Like, what is going to happen? Am I not going to get any of those projects anymore? Am I going to have a name behind me because of the way that I approach this? But I think it's part of also accepting that, because that's who you are as an individual. It's part of it is not really caring. Yeah. In saying like, this is who I am. This isn't right. And who cares if that's how, that's what they're saying about you. This is wrong. Right. So, but those are also lessons learned. So once you leave, how are you going to navigate that? How are you as an individual who has overcome these challenges and these barriers? How are you going to change that and support other individuals who may be going through the same thing right now? How are you going to back them up when they feel really kind of cornered? So it's one of those things. It's like, yes, lessons learned, but also what are you going to do with those lessons that you'd learned?
I love that. So how are you going to make it better for others? Mm-hmm. You know, so others don't have to walk that same path.
Yeah.
Because I think, you know, even just speaking about privilege, I think when we're in a position where we can say, I don't care that someone is saying this and I'm going to move on, there's an element of privilege there based on whether it's financial privilege or just right there. You've got choices. There are others as you may have been at other points in your life where you don't necessarily have those choices available to you.
Yeah.
And so, as we're coming sort of to the end of this show, and there's so much I just still wanted to explore. There's a couple of comments, and then I have a final question. One of the comments I wanted to share with you, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you when we originally spoke before we booked the podcast, was that I've worked in HR for more than 20 years. And I've had my own business for 5 years. And the reason I left working for any particular organization and wanted to work for myself were a few reasons. One of them is because I'd been searching for the human in human resources for my whole career and realized it wasn't there.
You told me about that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I told when you're sharing I still love the profession. We have a lot of work to do, friends. So human resources folks, like really, we've got, let's change the narrative. Mm-hmm. And then something else that you were talking about led me to this thought that I've had many times before is around the heavy lift that this work is, this heavy work that is necessary for us to create the equitable workplaces we want to be working in and providing for our children is not side of desk work. Mm-hmm. This is, we've got to do the work to make it foundational and integrated. And we've got a lot of work, I think, within our organizations to give that the space that's needed so that leaders should be doing work on their own for sure. But where's the responsibility of the organization here to make the space, create the space, and expect that leaders take that space to improve?
Wow. It's not easy.
It's not.
No, it's definitely not easy. I think it all kind of stems from, two things. One is, we kind of touched on this throughout this conversation. One is who is actually leading the team, like the individual, and what are their kind of their thoughts on this when it comes to, creative inclusive spaces and workplace culture, because it again kind of stems from individuals' mentality. Mm-hmm. And then, because you can't have it two different ways. You can't have a leader who thinks that, you know what, inclusion is not something that we should really focus on when your core mandate is inclusion as part of the organization.
Right.
But you're doing it because, oh my goodness, they have huge networks or they know a bunch of people. We can get tons of grants and projects. That's the wrong reason
right.
to do this. But that's part of the process, right? Is really understanding who you're bringing into these leadership roles. Who are they as individuals? What have they done personally to really tackle this on their own and really kind of move the agenda on this? Especially when it's kind of part of your values and the mission of the organization. I think that's a core thing to really look at. And I don't think it's looked at as much as it should be. Mm-hmm. And then the other kind of part of it is, are they open to change, but not change as in to benefit the organization, but change, internally to kind of accept the facts that this is not going well. These are all the problems that are being kind of brought to us. People are leaving. There's a huge kind of retention issue. It's actually saying, oh my goodness, we have a huge retention issue. I want to figure out why this is. And not saying, oh, well, we can, bring on other people.
Yeah.
right? So I think that's like a big one, is really understanding who you're bringing into the organization, and the people who are deciding who to bring to the organization need to be cognizant of that, right? So, and then they can't kind of go back and say, well, yeah, but that's not our problem or our fault. There's accountability for every single person who's affiliated in the organization, whether that's through hiring, whether that's through HR practices. They have a core responsibility to ensure that the practices that are within the organization are at the standards that they should be.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And that was not an easy, you nailed that, I think. I mean, there's lots of ways you could have answered that, but certainly is just like, I think there are many answers to that question, and what you shared is extremely valuable. And because I love the way that you brought it really down to a personal accountability point of view, because it's easy to look at the organization and blame an organization or something outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. And there are responsibilities there, but we can influence those, but we can't necessarily change those. If we hold up the mirror, we have 100% influence over what we see in the mirror, right? And what we do and how we behave and how we act and the actions we take and the learning journey that we're on. So my final question for you is, if there's one message that you would like to share with listeners today from the show, one message that they take away, what would be the most important message that you want to leave them with?
Sure. Maybe not a message, but more of a question to reflect on, is exactly kind of what we spoke about when it comes to, inclusivity and how inclusive organizations are, and looking at, their support system, really kind of dissecting the way that they're supporting their employees, the role of the leader. How are they allies to the people that they are working with? And what is missing and what are they doing about it, really? So it's more of a reflecting piece, is really asking those core questions that many probably haven't asked themselves, is to kind of understand, okay, well, how am I as a leader? How am I helping the people that I'm working with?
I think those are great questions. So simple. And there's so much power in simplicity. Thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge, your experience. I want to also, because I didn't even say this at the outset, say a huge kudos to you for the courage it must have taken to embark on this journey. You mentioned at the outset what led you to start the amazing Build Women Up series. I'm thankful that there was an unfortunate situation that was the catalyst. I'm not glad that you went through that, but without that, we wouldn't have this amazing series. And you are making a difference. And I so look forward to participating as a listener in the event for Black History Month and the women leaders that you're profiling. Just a huge, huge thank you and kudos to you.
Thank you so much. This has been a true honor to be at this podcast, and I'm really thrilled to kind of share my journey with you and everyone who's listening, and looking forward to future collaboration and working with others and continuing this work on allyship.
Wonderful. Thanks again.
Thanks, Louise.
You've been listening to Humanizing Leadership with Louise H. Reed, along with today's guest, Sowmya Rajasekaran. You'll find links to her work and website in the show notes on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, as well as in today's notes and quotes. You can get your hands on a copy of the notes and quotes from today's show by subscribing to my email list at louisehreed.com. Podcast theme music is from Ben Sound, so thank you to them. And of course, thanks to you, my amazing listeners, for tuning into today's show. If you've enjoyed the show, I ask that you please tell a friend and also subscribe to the show. I also invite you to contact me on LinkedIn, connect with me there. And finally, a special thanks to Contact Talk Radio Network and my podcast production team, Cameron Steele and Jay Andrews. Thanks again, my friends, for joining me today, and I'll see you